Yay. All right. We are recording now. I'm over here on the side, cut off. Excellent. All right. Well, welcome again to the Indy.net Consortium, and we are talking about alternatives to Visual Studio tonight. So, why this topic? Let me stop my sharing. So, anyone here use a Mac for like Visual Studio development or anything like that?
Sometimes.
Yeah. So did anyone get the notice about Visual Studio Mac going bye-bye?
Visual Studio Code.
So he uses VS Code. Oh, there's an echo. Do you have your mic? Oh, okay. Cool. Now we know whose mic is most powerful.
Nice code for the front end stuff and Visual Studio for the APIs.
Okay. Oh, there's messages in the chat, perhaps.
I have my Windows machines.
Oh, they pay for the meetups for each group. Sorry about that. Yeah, so .NET Foundation will pay for the meetups for each group. Yeah, that's what we should do. We
So
say,
we're not a meetup, I guess.
then you could only pay for pizza, and then we can make Microsoft pay for it. I don't know who pays for it. Huh. Anyway, so religion, politics. All right. So what was this, about a month ago? I think thereabouts.
They announced it.
Microsoft announced they're killing off Visual Studio for Mac, and in lieu of that, we'll get into what you thought about VS Mac if you ever used it. They're giving you the C# pack for VS Code, so you could do debugging and so forth inside of Visual Studio Code on Mac, so you wouldn't have to switch over to Windows. And your other options were go get VS for Windows, right? Go figure. Set up a virtual machine or buy a PC. They'll happily host it in Azure for you at a cost. Nothing's free in this world. And then they completely left out the competing product to Visual Studio, which is Rider, right, from JetBrains. So does anyone here use Rider? Yeah. So what?
I would say my experience, so I've been on Windows for many, many years, shifted over, I think during COVID, to a Mac as my primary development environment, used Visual Studio Mac for a moderate amount of time, and my experience was that Rider, I prefer Visual Studio on a PC.
Yeah.
But I prefer Rider to Visual Studio for the Mac, and took a little bit of cross-training time to sort of learn where everything is. But but at this point, I am 100% happy with Rider, and it runs Visual Studio. It runs Copilot.
Okay.
So you can have Copilot running, and that's completely seamless in Rider. And there's also Codium and a couple of other Copilot-like tools that will run, and it uses all the same language servers. So all of your right-click,
like Roslyn and all that.
Yeah, it's all Roslyn based.
Yeah.
So some of the menu items are located differently. Some of the config settings are a little different. You have to learn that, but my experience has been totally positive.
Yeah. Now are you using Rider now on Windows and Mac, or are you swapping?
These days, because I'm like 98% of my time on a Mac, when I do go back to Windows, I'm not there often enough to justify figuring out how to run Rider on Windows.
Yeah,
But if I were swapping back and forth, I would absolutely get myself set up with Rider on both and at least give that a try.
right.
It's interesting because
Yeah.
online,
Yeah.
John says Rider exclusively on Windows.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's people who love Rider.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
it's faster and you
Yeah.
get basically ReSharper built in because JetBrains,
right.
you know, the creators of Rider also created ReSharper.
One exception, Blazor WebAssembly.
Oh, Blazor websites?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Blazor is coming to Rider. I think they have like pre-release announced stuff or something. I'm not using Blazor, so I
Yeah,
can't, I don't.
you can unmute. I mean, if you want to talk, you're happy. I'm happy if you unmute. I think I muted everyone at the beginning, but you should be able to unmute
Oh, good.
if you
No,
want
I
to talk.
got the Android emulator and we can't
I
run
can
the
share
iOS
my-
emulator
share
on
my
Windows. We can only
experience.
run the iOS emulator on Mac, and guess what? We don't have Mac machines.
Yeah, that's,
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Was that?
I can share my experience using Rider on Windows. I'm
Yeah.
exclusively using Rider. One exception would be Blazor WebAssembly, specifically WebAssembly, because of the challenges with debugging in the browser and communicating back into the IDE and proprietary debugger for Microsoft. JetBrains had to come up with its own debugger, which is very clunky. It's not quite polished. So if it's anything that is Razor related code, the debugger is not always kicking in. So the breakpoints are there, but you don't hit them. And that's the only occasion where I'm using Visual Studio and have to basically go back and start Visual Studio. Otherwise, every other type of project, be it ASP.NET, desktop, console application, service, functions, whatnot, everything else is a smooth sail with Rider.
The problem, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the problem with Blazor WebAssembly, isn't that the same thing with Visual Studio? Last time I checked Visual Studio's debugger, it doesn't work very well with the WebAssembly Blazor. I've never used WebAssembly Blazor. I'm more like the server side Blazor. That's the only occasion I used it for. And it's very straightforward on, Blazor server side debugging. You debug on the server and everything is fine. Probably the subject of a different discussion. I never liked WebAssembly Blazor or didn't see why we would use it.
So Visual Studio debugging experience with Blazor WebAssembly specifically is flawless. It's not on par with regular debugger just because the nature of this technology and it's still catching up. But you hit in the breakpoints, you see the information, and it's getting better from release to release. Rider has the problem because the technology that Microsoft is using they cannot, it's proprietary. So they had to develop their own debugger. And that one is basically they trying to catch up with Microsoft. At some point in time, they will. And I believe Rider will probably improve their support in the next release or two. But this is the only area where I found Rider falling behind, unlike everything else where it's pretty much leading.
So have you tried or do you know if you could do the same debugging in VS Code? Or is that also incapable or less capable?
I don't use VS Code just because I'm a ReSharper guy, have been for many, many years. So Rider felt very natural. And also it's a fully fledged IDE as opposed to VS Code. Again, no offense to VS Code, but it feels a bit more as an editor, even though there's a strong push to make it as fully fledged IDE, I suppose. It's just with Rider, it's very easy to start and get going. The community support is impressive. Amount of resources is significant. And you can't discount the fact that it's a keyboard-friendly IDE.
Yeah.
Meaning that bindings are out of the box there and you can customize it to whatever you want.
So you'll never switch back to Visual Studio on PC.
I'll say never.
Okay. No, that's fair. So does anyone else here use Writer? I mean, you use Writer. So who uses VS Code? Okay,
Both Visual Studio and Code.
okay. So when do you decide to use Visual Studio versus
Visual
VS Code?
Studio's for API for me.
Yeah, VS Code is like for scripting, PowerShell,
Yeah.
Bash Shell, stuff like that. Visual
When I
Studio
was
would be
doing
for
React,
C#.
React and Angular,
Yeah.
that's-
And Vue, because our front end is Vue. So
Yeah.
we use VS Code for that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't do ground up development inside of Visual Studio? Or my VS Code?
I'd like to do some, I mean, let's say I've got a,
You're missing some libraries.
yeah, but let's say I have a CS, I have a C# issue and I just want to spin up a little console app just to test out some functionality, like, oh, I forgot how, null coalescing operators work or something like that. I just want a little snippet. I don't want to fire up Visual Studio just to test out a little snippet of code.
Right.
So that's the idea, just use VS Code and just, .NET build, .NET run. Okay, hey, I know how this new
Right.
feature works. Now I can integrate it into my project, my API project. So that's my goal. I'm not interested in porting the whole thing over the whole API over to VS Code. I don't see the benefit in that.
Yeah.
No. With what, Pi?
A bicep.
Bicep.
So,
I mentioned LinkPad, amazing tool for quick spikes and verification.
Yeah, LinkPad's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
so bicep is if you're deploying to Azure, the YAML
Oh, okay.
for defining.
Yeah. Your deployment.
Excuse me,
Continue.
I guess it's more GitHub.
Yeah, okay, your CI.
CI/CD, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
If you're doing that, it'll detect errors and so forth. It's
Yeah.
got syntax highlighting
Mm.
and so forth.
That's pretty powerful. Like when you play with some of the extensions, it's pretty amazing. Like, what was it? I
You
was,
said like bicep or
Yeah, BICEP.
Bicep.
like a,
Yeah.
okay, I got, because it's giving you leverage. I get it.
Somebody's a genius. Created that one.
yeah, if you haven't played with LinkPad's
Yeah, I
pretty
think that's pretty
amazing.
cool.
That's for those who haven't heard of it, it's LINQPAD, go
Yeah.
figure. Wow, it's pretty neat for just while testing out Lincoln's.
It's been long.
Little scratch pad, yeah, it's good for
Yeah.
I
that.
don't remember doing it. I don't remember how to do it.
But I mean, LinkPad, you pay for it, right? I mean,
There's a free,
it's a freemium model, but
but then I ended up paying for it because I appreciate it. I mean, it
Yeah.
helped me figure something out, and that I'm like, once you make my life easier, I think I should.
Yeah,
pay
it's
a
worth
little
it.
bit
yeah.
a little bit of cheddar, just because you put the work into it. So I think you should
Yeah,
get some money.
you should be paid for your work. I mean, after all, we are,
Yeah.
of course, but, yeah.
So at some point, does Visual Studio get too bloated? I'm curious because well, you have to pay for Rider. Rider's not free.
Nope.
And
Huh?
so Rider is a.
It's included in
A paid,
the JetBrains subscription.
right.
So
You
you-
have
you-
to pay for something.
Yeah.
You have
So
to
yeah, I
pay
mean,
For something from JetBrains.
but JetBrains, Rider itself is not free.
Right, and depending on.
Technically, neither is Visual Studio.
Depending on the size of your organization.
Yeah.
Visual Studio gets really expensive too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you get community editions free.
But-
Only if you make less than $1 million. It's like.
Well, I make more than $1 million.
If you're working for a company that makes 1 million.
Right. But I'm saying
Yeah.
for my personal stuff,
Right.
I use community edition,
Yeah.
obviously for work stuff, but I'm not paying for
Yeah,
it. You know?
I mean,
It's licensed for different stuff. Yeah.
So,
Don't you have to pay?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, exactly.
Yeah.
the coolest licensing term I've ever seen, and I haven't checked this in years, But, years ago, I know that Visual Studio's licensing model was that if your company bought you a license, that your company was buying you a license.
Oh,
And
Yeah.
so, back in the days when if anybody else here is old enough to remember when Visual Studio shipped on a stack of
Yeah,
CDs.
yeah.
oh, yes. I do.
But back in those days, that subscription was for you because Microsoft actively wanted you to be able to use that license on your own time to develop new products and companies.
Yeah, I
So
gotcha.
they purposely wrote the license so that it was a pass through to you. I don't know if that's true today with the fully
Yeah.
online, but it's worth looking because the enterprise version is heck of nice.
Yeah, community,
community if you
right,
have it.
right, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, and I guess I'm not too familiar with JetBrains, what else would you get? Cause I assume that's like a JetBrains thing. and
The
you get-
JetBrains subscription,
Part of it.
like if you do Ultimate, you
Uh-huh.
would get, JetBrains Resharper,
Okay.
Right? dot peak, dot
Webstorm.
memory,
Webstorm.
Yeah, I've never used dot peak or dot.
No, WebStorm wasn't from JetBrains.
Is it? How
No,
come it's one of the selections under my JetBrains subscriptions?
I didn't think WebStorm was from JetBrains because maybe it is.
No,
It
Maybe
is.
it is. Okay.
It is.
I don't know.
Is JetBrains the owner of WebStorm? Anyone know? We all have internet, so look it up. I'm hosting the meeting.
I'm not at work, it's not that important.
I would-
So I'll call out one issue that I have with both Rider and Visual Studio on Macs is that my experience is that the edit and continue and debugging experiences are not as good as on Windows. They're getting better, right? The trend
Yeah.
line is there. But that's the main area where I feel like I step down, but all the rest of, in my case, all the rest of the deployment
Yeah.
and scripting and setting up of cloud things and so forth, all of that got so much better
Yeah.
that I'll take that.
Yeah,
It's right easy to learn. I've never used that IDE.
I mean, if you know Resharper, you'll.
Or if you use Visual Studio,
For
You know-
23 years.
it'll take you, there'll be a few occasions where you can't find some settings or if you're trying to get into the project secrets or the CS prod,
Yeah,
right? Those are in different places in the menus.
Yeah.
Configured, right? You gotta, some of the, you gotta
Yeah,
get some new muscles.
it's like a new IDE.
Figure it out.
But
Yeah.
there's, but other than that,
Yeah.
I mean, you're in an IDE that's
it opens the solution files, right?
WebStorm's the smartest JavaScript IDE by JetBrains.
It is JetBrains. Okay, cool.
I thought it was an F.
So, yeah,
They use that
I'm
as
willing to be
no-
wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, has anyone else here done like Linux development using VS Code or, because Rider, doesn't it also work on Linux?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could, I think you can run it on Linux machines.
Yeah. So has anyone
Yeah,
tried
you can.
that?
You can. It runs on Linux, and I have a friend of mine who's full-time developing on Linux using Rider.
Yeah, and how's the experience for dev?
He's a hard-eye Linux fella, so he swears by it. But I'm pretty sure if he would not be happy, he would probably switch to something else.
Okay. Interesting. So yeah, I'm curious, like when does Visual Studio become too much? Like, I mean, Visual Studio, I'm thinking all the way back. Let's look at Visual Studio, maybe VS 2015. Let's look 2012 and 2015, right? I mean, sometimes it could take what, minutes for your solution to load, you know? Yeah, BMV, it was a nightmare. Oh my gosh. But like today, I mean, Visual Studio, they really overhauled it. I mean, they changed it. So I don't know about Stars Code or anything, but like huge applications used to take me multiple minutes to load. Now it'll take, maybe a minute before, I can go start coding, and it's, maybe 2 minutes if ReSharper's installed. Because ReSharper's got to do its big scan in the beginning, and then everything's fast.
Yeah,
Right?
it's
Yeah.
Slow, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
The
one bad thing about research. That's the only bad.
so is that faster in Rider?
I did, so I'm not sure, in part because, right, I'm switching machines to the, from Intel to the M2 Mac and.
Yeah.
But also, I wasn't running ReSharper. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I wasn't running ReSharper on my Visual Studio. So switching over to Rider, I'm
I
adding.
mean,
No, when
on VS Windows.
so I wasn't using prior to Rider. I wasn't using ReSharper.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Right. I was aware of it, but the refactoring tools and so forth that were built
Yeah.
into Visual Studio totally worked for me. So,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I actually on VS Mac, which I mean I don't do development most of the time anymore. But yeah, I would use Mfractor. Yeah. It was for Xamarin developers. Yeah, it was really good when it worked. So that's the issue when the plugins work.
The
So
writer
has they-
experience,
Huh?
the writer experience when it comes to ReSharper aspect is kind of interesting because the solution is loaded extremely fast. But there is a little bit of a lag between the ReSharper functionality, right, when it kicks in, and what you can do with the solution. So for the first
Right.
couple of seconds, you can navigate between the files and all that, but ReSharper shortcuts won't be necessarily
Right.
effective. But working with 2, 3 solutions and jumping between those, I found that probably under 20 seconds, what it takes to fully load a decent sized solution and enable IntelliSense and ReSharper and all that.
Wow, 20 seconds total, like from launch.
20 seconds from cold launch on i7. I will mention that CPU, not the CPU that matters a lot, it's the RAM. So if you
Right.
have more than 32, it definitely helps because one of the darker sides, I guess, of Rider is it is Java based, it's packaged, and it's hungry for RAM.
Oh, so you're saying 20 seconds in Rider
Correct.
to be up. Oh, okay. I thought you were saying Visual Studio. I'm like, you're a liar.
No. I've never had Visual Studio in
With
less than
respect.
30 seconds.
Yeah. I'm like, gosh, I don't even know if I could get to I mean, I could get to the open screen in, under 10 seconds probably.
The first 10 seconds of Rider when you started from cold really gives you the feeling of VS Code, right? That it's snappy, it loads the tree view, you can navigate between the files, you can
Right.
open them and whatnot. It's just the shortcuts, the bindings are not there yet. Refactoring is not working necessarily.
Right.
That's what takes another 10, 15 seconds.
Yeah. Well, it's just kind of just like Visual Studio, because ReSharper has to scan everything. So well, 2 questions. One, what does the extensions ecosystem look like on Rider, and how does it slow down the environment? Number one. Let's start with that.
From my personal experience, there are more plugins or extensions for Rider than you will ever need. It's kind of amazing because a lot of these extensions are shared between different JetBrains products. So WebStorm, IntelliJ, whatnot. A lot of these extensions starting as open source projects and then either mature into supported by JetBrains or get adopted by someone else, forked and maintained. Personally, the extensions that I've used a lot were the ASP.NET secrets, so that the you don't put any secrets in the settings, right? Standard .NET thing. Entity framework, PowerShell, MySQL stuff. Again, the ecosystem is quite rich.
So has anyone used Rider and then moved back to Visual Studio?
I currently use them both at the same time. In my work, I use Visual Studio for the enterprise development. On my hobby projects, mainly Blazor server, I use Rider at home. And
So-
Does NuGet work the same?
Huh?
Does NuGet work the same between the two?
Yeah, NuGet would work the same.
Okay.
So what makes you use Rider over the stuff from work?
I just wanted to try it out. That's the only reason. At work, we all use Visual Studio. I probably could have used Rider there, but we usually work on enterprise applications and it's like many projects, sometimes over 30 projects there. And I got used to using Visual Studio for years. On Rider, very recently though, it's like probably a month ago, I installed it on my personal computer and I tried to use it. I'm still learning. So far, I get by debugging and running the application and the basic stuff, breakpoints. But I mean the other suites of ReSharper, the memory, I forgot what's the name of the tool. It's memory something. I didn't get to that level.
What,
yet.
memory?
Yes, that one.
So is the debugging experience better than Visual Studio?
I feel it's pretty much the same. I don't get any additional
Features?
benefit. And there is no limits. It's pretty much the same. I don't feel any I don't feel any issue using Rider. So far, so good. No problem. I think if they force me to use Rider from now on, I wouldn't complain. It's not a terrible user experience for a developer who's always been using Visual Studio for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So what I've not heard is anyone saying that they flip-flop as a ton between VS Code and Rider. It's like Visual Studio and Rider, unless you're working on scripts.
Well, so I flip back and forth between VS Code and Rider all day long, but that's because I prefer VS Code for front end, React, TypeScript, etc. kind of things. And so I go into VS Code for that mindset, and then I jump over to Rider for everything that's C#. And in my case, that's all.
Okay.
And the context. Yeah.
So has anyone here used the C# pack for Visual Studio Code for VS Code? Who here knew about it?
I know people that love it, but it's never.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Now I'm curious because I had heard of it, but I'm not sure I ever installed it. Because I had Visual Studio. So I was like, but I've got, like one of my guys at the office, I mean, he swears by Rider. Absolutely swears by it. Doesn't want to really use Visual Studio unless he has to. But
learning more about, but it doesn't handle my interface. But how much do you think what you're choosing right now has to do with just what you're hearing?
Is that a question?
Yeah.
For what?
Like you're saying that you used Ryder, one of the guys at your office swears by it. As you're making these decisions, how much of the decision is just based on like you hear somebody who likes it versus
Well, I mean, it depends, like, does it support all the stacks that we've got? And is it a benefit or a hindrance? If it's a benefit, then I want my developers to be happy. So I don't care. I mean, if it can open up the project and it supports, latest.NET stuff, supports Maui, supports Blazor where we use it, supports NuGet, which sounds like all those boxes are checked, then if you work faster that way, then yay. Now I do know that one of my devs will use Rider on his Mac, but he'll switch to Visual Studio on the PC. He doesn't want to use Rider on the PC. He thinks Visual Studio is better. At least I think that's what he's told me. Just for like Maui development and everything, I don't think the support is there yet in Rider, but that's mobile dev. And it's a special template, it's a whole thing, it's wired up specially in Visual Studio. There's a lot of syntactic sugar, probably a lot of UI sugar over how everything's being built and compiled, or presented and compiled. So, that
I
might
will
be
probably
why.
add something along the lines that it really depends on what you do.
Yeah.
There are certain areas of Visual Studio that probably have more value for the people that use the tool before. Muscle memory is
Yeah.
something to consider as well. If you are a keyboard junkie, sorry, I didn't mean to offend anyone, but if you prefer keyboard over mouse, Rider is definitely more geared towards developers that don't want to take their hands off the keyboard. There are certain things that Visual Studio is catering for. Rider is targeting the little things because, it's the death by 1,000 cuts. For example, if you want to include a NuGet package, yes, you can go to a package manager through the UI, or you can just open CSproj and start typing, and you're going to get full IntelliSense. Rider is really great at that. When you want to select a specific version on a NuGet package, you can just, hit space, and Rider will automatically deduct that you are trying to include a specific version, and rather than giving you the latest, it will give you a drop-down with a list. So it's these little things that make Rider very unique and different from the rest of the tools. And again, I've spent most of my career with Visual Studio, so it's near dear to my heart. I'm not going to claim it's a bad tool, but in terms of productivity and combined with ReSharper habits, it's the one that I choose for the type of workload that I'm doing. I'm assuming that if you're a Maui developer or something that requires, WPF, even though WPF is supported quite well on Rider as well, potentially you might find something else. A good example, for example, I had to use Visual Studio with a client because guess what? I couldn't install Rider, right? Another client was okay with the tool that I'm using, but they would not pay the ReSharper license. So I just got Rider because it's cheaper and it has ReSharper built in. So really, really depends. And VS Code, for example, I use it often, believe it or not, just to make notes. And the reason why I do that is because when you shut down VS Code and restart it,
Everything's still there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Notepad++ is good about that too.
Yep.
Yeah. Dean says he just loaded the extension in VS Code, but he hasn't used VS Code much since he has Visual Studio. So what made you load the extension in VS Code, Dean? Is that just to experiment with it?
I was gonna try to learn more about VS Code because I wanted something a little more lighter weight. So I figured, well, I do mostly C# stuff. I definitely needed some of those extensions. I just, like I said, I haven't really gotten into learning VS Code all that much quite yet, just because my day-to-day work is always in Visual Studio, but it's just a pig.
Yeah, and, I mean, think about that. At what point does Visual Studio become not worth it? I mean, it depends. I mean, to use the latest Microsoft tech, it sounds like you kind of have to use VS Code or pardon me, Visual Studio, but Rider, as long as you're using like .NET Core, you should be all set, right? And if it's all Roslyn behind the scenes, you should get similar IntelliSense. And JetBrains is going to update ReSharper with whatever they need in order to support the latest stuff, because Visual Studio is a pretty big market.
What is Roslyn?
So Roslyn's the language engine that's used for compiling and interpreting C# or MSIL and in general.
Okay.
So when they built the compilers for C#, what they realized is that you don't really just want a compiler. You want a thing that an IDE could talk to ask it about the code. And so Rosalind is, I think they call it a compiler services or something of that sort. So it's basically take the compiler and rip it apart and put it back together in a way that lets you build systems that ask
you
questions.
query the
about code.
compiler.
Yeah.
So IntelliSense.
Well, you can find out something would fail compilation.
Right.
Yeah.
Compiling it.
So IntelliSense wouldn't work without Roslyn. Is that true?
Well, I think they're closely tied together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because
Like-
IntelliSense has to know what
Hey,
classes
Roslyn.
are available and properties of a.
Yeah. Hey, Roslyn, is this syntax correct?
Yeah.
And-
Otherwise,
and
you
it
can read.
it can respond back.
Yeah.
False.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's querying the compiler before it even compiles to say, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This isn't structured properly.
Yeah.
But I've heard people use VS Code because when they're first learning some functionality, they don't want the IntelliSense, the cheating. They want to be able to figure it out and really grasp what's available. And if you
Yeah.
use VS Code, it's not as helpful, but that's the point. When you're learning something new, right?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, VS Code, let's say you want to write JavaScript or Python.
Yeah.
Let's go with things that are scripty, that are more along VS Code's. You can do full-on projects in VS Code. I mean, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just don't load the extension, you won't get any of the syntactic highlighting, etc. But I think, as a developer, it seems a little foolish, not to take the help. I mean, okay, don't use like Copilot, don't use auto.
You're first learning something out.
Don't use auto completion.
You're just walking through the IntelliSense, you don't even know what you're doing.
But like
that
code
there's a point to
highlighting,
that.
I think would be
Yeah.
huge. Like, I mean, I think you should see while you write that, hey, that's not going to work.
Here's some options.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you can immediately
That
get
is-
feedback and like, oh, well, I don't want that red squiggly ever again.
Yeah.
It's just like someone slapping your hand going, no, don't do that. But
Yeah.
gently,
Yeah.
gently shocking you, into submission.
I got a question.
One of the nice things about Rider, and sorry, I feel like I'm acting as a sales agent for JetBrains, is affinity to the language you're using. And it could be markup language, could be programming language, could be database SQL variant. Because, for example, when you're using SQL Server connection, and they have an Explorer and whatnot, it actually detects the connection and provides the refactorings for the database, for the SQL statements, appropriate to the type of relational database that you're using. Because for MySQL, it's going to be different than SQL Server, and different than Oracle. And I found that extremely powerful.
So now, is that extendable or is it just what JetBrains decides to support? So can you add additional extensions that enhance that support?
Yeah, that's how it works. It comes through extensions.
Oh, okay.
The Rider itself is pretty much modular product, unlike
Yeah.
Visual Studio, unfortunately, which is more monolithic.
Well, Visual Studio recently has become less monolithic, you know, with their individual workloads, etc. I mean, you know, if you install everything, yeah, Visual Studio is big, but you installed everything, right? You know, it's going to be big, and you know, Rider, you know, it wouldn't be truthful to say, well, Rider's so much smaller in Visual Studio because you still have to install all the framework, etc., that goes along with it. So, you know, like Visual Studio itself isn't huge unless you make it huge. Not that it's as tight as Rider, but you know,
So the approach that JetBrains has taken with their products is substantially different from Microsoft's Visual Studio because I think the philosophy is different. So for example, when you install Visual Studio, good luck running two versions, major versions of Visual Studio side by side. I've personally run into a problem, even though you're supposed to be able to run 2019 and 2022 and 2022 preview. They were basically butting heads with JetBrains, and it's not unique to Rider necessarily, it's all of their product lines. They have a product called Toolbox. And the Toolbox is basically acting as an installer on your computer of different versions of various products that you want to have. So for example, if you want to have Rider stable version and you want to have the preview, the latest nightly build, you can do that through the Toolbox and there is no problem. They are installed, sandboxed, everything. And it's phenomenal because you can literally have tens of versions of Rider, unstable or stable, well, not stable, but unstable, and run in parallel. So for example, when they have a new feature and you want to try that out, it's not going to cause you, you know, tears and suffering because you have to repave the machine.
yeah, I don't think I've ever experienced that, so I can't speak to that because I know I definitely had what was it, VS 2017 and VS 2022 running at the same time because I had to because there's certain, you know, payloads you can't run in the newer versions of Visual Studio due to what was included with the older versions of Visual Studio. So I definitely have installed them side by side, and that hasn't been a problem. It was many years ago. Yeah, like Visual Studio 2005 and 2000, what was 2001 or whatever, you know, it was, oh my gosh, or 2003 and 2005. And oh my gosh, it was horrible. But, you know, modern day, I haven't had that issue because like the Toolbox equivalent, you know, not arguing, just pointing out the, you know, you've got the Visual Studio installer and it does the same thing. You know, it lets you manage each instance separately, you know, add and remove workloads, etc. Yeah, it's
Right.
kind
But
of
what's happening, what's happening with Visual Studio, let's say you're using 2022 preview. And what happens is that if you have updated to the latest preview and you want to roll back to one preview before, that becomes a real challenge because you always staying on the latest, greatest preview. Where
yeah.
here,
I mean,
you can
that's
literally
fair.
pin down whatever the previews you want to have and have them in parallel.
But why would you do that unless you were a? I mean, just to play devil's advocate here, why would you be like, oh man, I want to go back to the previous preview?
I'll explain.
It's
I'll explain
a
that
preview.
because you sometimes what happens is they accumulate features for release,
Mhm.
and let's say
Yeah.
you need that feature, so they call it EAP or early access program.
Yeah, early access program. Yeah.
Yeah, you get the latest EAP, and what happens is, let's say there is a regression. So now you need to go back to the previous EAP because you still want to use the feature, but you don't want the impact of the regression to impact your daily work.
So hold on, you relied on, I'm just gonna ask you, you relied on a preview versions feature to do your work, and then you had to roll back because they got rid of it.
No, they didn't get rid of it. What I'm saying is that there's a regression bug, right? Because again, nightly builds are not 100%
Right, good.
stable.
It's a preview, right?
Think
It's
of
not
it
ready to
as
go.
working
Yeah.
with Git. Think of it as working with Git. With Git, you have all the history, and you can go back and forth between the commits.
Yeah.
You don't have to
No,
stay on
I
the
hear
head.
you. I'm just giving you a hard time because we're talking about previews and being able to install multiple previews. I was giving you a hard time. I shouldn't do that.
No worries.
So speaking of Git, you mentioned Git. So as far as source control goes, does Rider support other things besides Git? Because some teams they use TFS or something else. I've only seen Git. I don't know if it's extensible to support something like TFS. If the source code is on TFS, people would find it hard to switch to a development environment that doesn't support that.
I think that would be just another extension, right? Has anyone tried like SVN? Well, I mean, in the United States, we use Git, but you go to Asia, friends, they use Subversion.
Really?
They do not use Git. I mean, it is not nearly as common as it is here. I mean, there's more advanced companies that are moving towards Git, but no, I mean, Subversion is huge. And then like in China, they have their own version of GitHub. It's still Git, but it's their GitHub. It's interesting.
On Twitter too.
Well, they'll block GitHub from access.
Yeah, sure.
And so sometimes like companies we work with can't download, they can't pull code, they can't push because GitHub's not available today. The Great Firewall is, blocking it. And then, but tomorrow they can. Tomorrow they can. You have no idea why. Zero idea. It's like, what? Oh, okay. So did you have another comment?
Oh, I was just gonna say, just on the versioning issue, nowadays, everything that I do is cloud-based, we're
Yeah.
built, spin up and spin down environments procedurally,
Yeah.
but when you're working on client machines, the root of the Visual Studio versioning issue is that when you do Visual Studio installs on your machine, it pollutes the global installed base
Right.
of
The gap
versions,
and
and it will
everything.
change them. And so I've worked at places where we were building where we had lots of client machines, and devs were not allowed to install Visual Studio onto a client machine for test purposes because that would screw up the environment. And all of a sudden that dev's machine was different from all of the other, from all of the other clients, right? It would screw up the imaging in ways that just enough problems had happened over the years that, and Visual Studio, because of the way Windows tracks that stuff, it doesn't roll back to.
You've got your gap. You gotta be careful. So they've gotten better over the years. I mean, it's definitely gotten better, but like if you're running legacy enterprise code, even from prior to 2012, just even around that time frame, oh my gosh, what a nightmare. I will add, I know we've talked a lot about Rider and we've talked about VS Code and we've talked about Visual Studio. What?
Are there any other ones? I mean, we talked about these two IDEs for C# coding. Is there anything else I could see?
What about Aptana? I've used that for Python. Is that
What is it?
Aptana? APTA? Everyone heard of it?
Does it work with .NET?
I have not even.
I mean, I
used it
think
for Python
any-
years ago.
Any code editor could work with .NET because of the CLI, right?
The main other families would be the new emerging online
Code editors.
So code spaces and things of that sort, where you're not running on your machine. You're running in a cloud instance. And I would expect that 5 years from now, that's what I would be using, but it's certainly not what I'm using today. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're doing like enterprise, like API development, it would make sense. Like everything's in the cloud already
Anyway.
backed up,
Yeah.
but I mean, there's benefits to something that isn't in the cloud, but who knows? I mean, eventually things get fast enough and smart enough, right? Like I was gonna bring up, I had, everybody remembers SQL Management Studio,
Yeah.
right? That's what and there were like so many different versions of it, like SQL Management Studio Express, and then Azure Data Studio came out, and Azure Data Studio I thought was like superior in almost every way.
Conrad uses it.
And initially it didn't have all the features of SQL Server Management Studio. So like if I wanted to export a backpack file, I couldn't do it unless I also had SQL Management Studio installed. But now Azure Data Studio is based on the same engine as VS Code and is extensible. So I was able to just add like the Microsoft SQL management pack. And now, boom, I can just export backpacks. It's faster, threaded. It doesn't have all the weird screwiness. Well, it was just like you took an app from like 1997 and you just dragged it through to 2020 something. And it's just like, what kind of horrifying, it's just like, anyone ever used an old Windows app on a high resolution display? And it's like this big, and you can't, you don't have any idea why it's this big. You're like, and you'll move it over to your other monitor and then it'll look normal, but you bring it back to your high resolution display. And it's funny if you do half and half, and then it gets all blurry on one of the displays as it tries to scale it. I mean, oh my gosh. But this, there are other alternatives. I mean, not just on the development environment side, but like even in SQL, at what point do you have to give up Visual Studio? Like what happens next with Microsoft support for VS? Maybe they just say we're done with this. It's good enough. Although I don't think they're going to do that anytime soon, but I could see them moving, like significant pieces to the web and then tying it in with GitHub.
They're making money off those licenses.
Does Microsoft make extensions for Rider, just like they do for like VS Code for doing the Azure integration?
No, it's either provided by JetBrains. So for example, Azure Toolbox, which works with the Azurite storage emulator and some other things. I don't remember what is it. They provide that plugin themselves. A lot of things are coming from the community. I would say vast majority of the plugins are coming from community.
So do you get the feeling that Microsoft just doesn't want anything to do with JetBrains Rider, but they want the JetBrains ReSharper support? It sure feels that way.
That's exactly the state of affairs. They pretend that JetBrains doesn't exist.
Yeah, that was a lot of
As a
people
matter
were
of fact,
upset when
one
that
of the
happened.
MVPs,
The
one
breakup.
of the MVPs was kicked out from the MVP program because he was a JetBrains employee.
Boy, I wonder what happened there, because that's what happened when they did their announcement of, killing VS Mac basically, and saying just use here's your options, C# pack or C# extension for VS Code, get a VM, or like Parallels, or buy a PC, or use an Azure hosted service, like Azure hosted VM to run your Windows, whatever. And people are like, what about Rider? But and like, complete crickets from Microsoft. I was surprised because they're so usually developer friendly.
So I just checked, the Copilot plugin for Rider is shipped by GitHub, which is Microsoft.
Yeah.
So
But
So
don't
there's some
say
support.
Microsoft. Politics.
So when you work with Rider, does it allow you to log in as a different user or to a different domain? No, not a lot of developers have to do that, but I do on a regular basis.
Meaning, can you switch between, like, I consult for two different companies and I'm switching which I'm logged in as?
Well, it could be your Azure DevOps integration.
Yeah.
That's a real big one. Like in Visual Studio, that'll matter. So like if you have NuGet packages that are tied to an Azure DevOps instance, you can't access those unless you're logged in as that particular account.
I think I.
Is that what you're talking about? Like that kind of stuff?
Yeah, like if you're working for a consulting company.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, we have that too. Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah,
You have to be careful because depending on the state, or the state, the country that you need to access data for, you have to log into that particular account because of data residency rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know Visual Studio will tell you which one you're logged into. You look at the icon of who you're logged in as. And just make sure your icon for each account is different. Like, make one of them have like a 1 on it and another have a 2 on it or something, or give one like a red border, another green border, something. So you know which one you're in. Different photos. Yeah, that's how I know which account I'm connected to, because my personal account has a different photo than my my business account. Or you can wait for the error message.
Or you can make sure you delete the wrong stuff.
Usually.
Yeah, you delete stuff out of
Yeah,
a customer's.
that's how you know.
Yeah.
Oh, I deleted the wrong person's data. It was the wrong. I thought it was my personal customers table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Might be. Oh, that's a production.
Oh, shut
Crap. Bummer. Well, that was a good conversation. Thank you, everyone. Does anyone else have any closing comments?
Oh, this was good. Thank you, guys.
Oh, you're welcome. I'll get this the recording up. So if anybody wants to review it, including JetBrains sales, they're handing out free licenses for Rider for all people. All right. Well, hey, thank you all very much. We'll see you next month.
What are we doing next month?
I gotta figure that one out. We gotta see who we want to talk. Well, let's do that. I like that. Make my life easier.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's right. I love it. You're the best. All right. Hey, thank you. And religion and politics.
What is the foundation?
All right. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next month. Stay tuned.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Never read the Bible.